Dear friends, thank you for supporting this channel on Patreon to join our growing family of donors, now 59 patrons strong. And remember, once we reach 100 active patrons, we will start sending out a 1-ounce U.S. Silver Eagle, autographed by your host, Dunnigan Kaiser, to one active supporter each and every month. Thanks for taking a minute to pitch in by going to patreon.com/reluctantpreppers and pledging your support today. Thanks very much.
Hey Reluctant Preppers, this is showing you just how easy it is to purchase silver without paying any premium over spot price. You just go to sdbullion.com/rp, scroll down and enter the special code to get silver without any premium, and they'll mail it to your mailbox, discreetly packaged. Inside you'll find a beautiful 10-ounce bar of fine silver, and you are able to purchase that and have it and add it to your stack and your collection without paying any premium, and you're supporting Reluctant Preppers along the way. Thanks.
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
What you've been outlining for us is just this recurring nightmare to the common person about collusion and corruption of the financial elite, basically raping and pillaging and causing these transfers, these intentional, planned, and calculated transfers of wealth and destruction of competition and consolidation of power and money at the tops. And we see this you're talking about decade after decade across more than a century now, and that brings us to the current decade. And when we have after the Bush administration, the Obama administration, we were about to see what many people thought was going to be just basically a ceremonial coronation of Hillary as our next president, and it was futile to oppose her because the powers that be and the media and everybody were all arrayed behind her. We saw even within the Democratic camps, Bernie Sanders just being a casualty of stepping on that out of line of that freight train that was going to make sure that she got coronated. And yet you have this apparent maverick in the person of Donald Trump, who was first lampooned and then joked he can't be a real serious candidate, and on just surprising, evidently, the pundits over and over again, and showing up all the polls, and yet making it in, defeating 17 other contenders, and finally making it past and into the White House. The question remains in people's mind now is, whose side is Trump really on? Is he the real deal? Is he really going to drain the swamp? Or is he, when we saw him appoint a whole bunch of cabinet members from high-level banking firms, people got really discouraged and are still waiting now a year later to see. They've certainly seen some actions being taken, but you've been privileged to various sources of information or perspective and opinions on this that give you, I think, from the context of all that you've surveyed, a unique perspective on this. We'd sure like you to share that perspective with us on what we believe is actually happening, who the man Trump is, whether you think he's actually going to stand up for the middle class and so on, or what lies ahead this year.
Well, let me tell you, I don't believe necessarily that I have any sorts of information that are not available to other people. The perspective may be different.
Perhaps you've been paying more attention than some of us.
Yeah, but I think basically if I've got any perspective, it is one that is informed by having learned the big lies about the Great Depression and just how seriously we were lied to, and then examining everything else. And I've had a very hard time finding any important thing that we've ever been told the truth about. Now, with that kind of perspective, I have certainly been keeping my eye open, and frankly, I don't think it's a very close call, in my opinion. There is just too much reason to believe that Trump is not only one of them, he is their devoted adversary, They certainly are making it appear so, and doing everything, as far as I can tell, to end him permanently, immediately, if possible. So, in that circumstance, if you look at things, I had long before President Trump had indicated he was interested in running, it had certainly occurred to me, and I'm sure to many others, that there was no way we were going to get a really honest candidate that would go against the ruling elite, as long as he didn't have his own money. Because if you have to come up with the money from other sources to run in a presidential contest, you're going to be an instrument of the sources of money that provide you, and they're all part of the ruling elite. Those big money sources cannot be outspent, and somehow they'll get the candidate. And if they can't get the candidate, they'll steal the election another way, as long as they have that kind of ruling elite influence. But I can tell you for certain, the moment that Donald Trump, it wasn't that I was such an absolute great fan of Donald Trump's, but I recognized his financial capability as soon as he announced that this could be a game changer. And boy, was that ever right? Because I've come to believe, based on information from sources that anybody else can find, if they look for them, that there were other people persuading him to do this, to do it for the nation, because it's our only chance. Because I don't think the ruling elite had that much more left in their game plan. They were looking maybe to wind things up on the middle class by the year 2000 or thereabouts. And maybe they were running late already, but I don't think our chances were very good to last much longer after this 2016 election. And I think that those reputedly being the high military officers, naval, Army, Marine, Air Force, that had been expelled from the service, active service, during the years of the Bush administration and the Obama administration, had decided something had to be done. And they wound up forming an organization that wound up being the ones to present the case to Donald Trump that someone has to do this and get into a position of leading the country out of this dilemma, out of this pending doom. And you're the person who can do it. You got the capabilities of various kinds. Nobody is Mr. Perfect, but my goodness, how can you beat the level of energy that has been shown to this date? And not to mention ingenuity and courage and so forth and so on. So that one is an easy call, but in terms of watching the various, the evidence of what the scope of the conflict has been, just in my estimation, it has been breathtaking. To me, it's almost beyond the point of what any reasonable person would expect. If I had suggested that the approaching presidency was going to go after the ruling elite and get them out of the U.S., people would have thought that I was absolutely nuts. And I probably had been accused of that for exactly that reason. But we're talking about something far more significant than that. It's not just a matter of getting, I think, undoubtedly from the activities and plans that I hear are going forward, that we're talking about recognizing the fact that for centuries, this has been a global problem. You can't just get them out of your country and then expect they're going to leave you alone. That's what happened. That's what happened to Russia in 1917, when apparently they told them, the ruling elite, no to a central bank, and so the Tsar got assassinated, and they got taken over for 70 years by people who were so. I mean, the best description of the Bolsheviks that I can come up with, it doesn't amount to describing a communist. It seems to me to very much fit the description that was given in that elitist manifesto of what was termed, quote, the men of the new republic. The men of the new republic would be that shadow government that is created behind every national government in the world to shadow it and control it and to manipulate it and to finally make it so weak that it crumbles in its own footprint, and the shadow government there is there to take over. And they describe those men of the new republic as being ones who believe that their morality is to be determined by the principle that I, as a person, as a man of the new republic, was created by God, and therefore anything that I want, anything that I wish to do is God's will, and so therefore it's moral. And therefore there is no moral limitations on my actions. And with that kind of crass morality, so-called morality or immorality in mind, that's exactly the description that seemed to me fit the Bolsheviks to a T. And they went in and murdered 60 million to 100 million Christian Russians that, by the way, did have a substantial middle class back in the early 1900s. And it was simply completely decimated by that outside invader put in there by the ruling elite of basically Western nations to overthrow it and call it communism, but basically a dictatorship to have complete control there and abuse it for those 70 years. But in the meantime, we gave them the central bank called the Federal Reserve, and they've had their way with us in other ways while allowing us to call ourselves free and independent and equal justice under law and so forth. So if you'd like to interrupt me there or bring me back down, I think there are many things going on right now. I did write a short commentary last week that was the subject of that other interview you mentioned. And essentially it wasn't so much, well, part of it was my thinking, but in terms of what was related there was a list of items that has been essentially foreseen, or are not just a matter of foreseeing. It was stated by Meganon, an anonymous person that is posted on the internet last year, and occasionally this year. I frankly haven't been able to follow that often, and I haven't even been able to since that interview because I've been so busy on some other things, including getting books out the door. But in any event, Meganon had laid out, this is the kind of thing that you can expect in coming months, including starting in this month of March. These are going to be substantial events, and it's important for you to know about them so that you can not only prepare yourself and have your understanding strengthened, but you can also help to pass along information to others, because as these things come along, there's going to be substantial disruptions of normal daily life. And one of those kind of things is a likely substantial disruption of the financial markets, the stock and bond markets, and that would come with such things as closing the Federal Reserve, closing the other central banks. In other words, every central bank controlled by the Rothschilds around the world would be closed. Those are significant things. Another aspect would be the creation of a new currency for the United States, a gold-backed money that would come into effect. Obviously, when you're talking about matters that important to the financial world, there's going to be a shake or two on such things as the financial markets and the even much larger bond market. There's going to be a substantial effect on interest rates. But especially if there is a clear design that is promptly made known as soon as it safely can be made known, I believe that those kind of markets are capable of correcting fairly promptly, and that will do so for their own enlightened purposes. That is to recover and to profit from them, as opposed to simply insisting that a crash be done, which, as I've described in probably too lengthy detail in our discussion this evening, those previous crashes have been in many respects engineered and intended by purposeful short selling, because the short selling is the fastest time for making money that the financial world has. That's why they love the crashes. They make money a lot faster than they do with a gradual build up in the economic growth of a country. So you look at the various items that I listed. I just named a couple of them, but they're all very important. And all of them, I think overall the most important one is that what is being described by Meganon and QAnon is that those operating the United States government at this time, our military forces, by the strength of the emergency order of December 21st last year, which declared a national emergency caused by serious human rights abuses and corruption, that the assets of individuals and firms engaging in those kind of activities were ordered to be frozen and subject to confiscation by the U.S. government. That is the kind of design that is intended to go after the ruling elite on a global basis, not just getting them out of the United States, not just relying that if we can just get them out of New York or get them out of this country, they'll be offshore and it'll be okay. No, that's not the way it works. This is an international corruption, and it is presenting a serious threat to the survival of our nation. By any reasonable evaluation, it's clear in my mind that our nation has been under very severe threat of destruction, of pulling down the government, including specifically this elected government that opposes the further enrichment of the ruling elite at the very minimum. So that's the kind of thing that I think is going on presently. And yes, the forecasts are for some turbulent times. I have believed for quite some time that with the destruction to the dollar that has already been created by the Federal Reserve, I told you that the biggest year of adding to the monetary base in 2000 to 2008 was $45 billion in the 12 months. Well, I mean, goodness, that wouldn't even get you a month in the last a couple of years.
4, yeah.
I mean, they've gone up. They went from 845 billion dollars in total monetary base in 2008, August of 2008, and they have gone to. They announced that they've got 4.5 trillion or something of the sort in monetary base now, and that's just what they admit to. The stories that you hear about what else has gone out the back door is just, I mean, it's off the charts. So to get back to a currency that is actually value in hand for the working man, who has to have something or deserves to have something in hand for his work that day in order to feed his family, and not having to depend upon whether the government's going to be good enough to still have it worth something at the end of the day or the end of next year or anything of the sort. Those are the kind of things that are involved in making a decision on what kind of money we're going to have. And any new system that we have somehow has to get back to that point that we don't want to be in the position of having to trust a government or a central bank of any kind to have out there all of that value so it can be stolen from the back door, and then we are left with paper that is worth nothing but the heat it'll generate if you light it on fire. That's what printed money, printed currency gets you in the final analysis in every case that it's been used. And yet, at this time, with all of these actions involved, another emergency order that has just been signed in the more recent past, I think this month, March 2nd, is a special executive order that allows civilians to assist the military in conducting courts martial, so that the level of demand for military trials can be handled efficiently, so that this criminal activity can be brought to heel and punished in a reasonable time frame without the kinds of corruptive influences that have so drastically undercut the justice system in our civil courts. So there we are. I'll pause and see if
so I've just picked up a few nuggets, and just to give credit where it's due, Sarah Westall's channel, guys, if you want to search out Sarah Westall and Wayne Jett, you'll get a great interview where she goes point by point through about a dozen different major conclusions that you're talking about here, some of. And among these are, you made some very startling observations or pronouncements there that people are saying is the case. And we've had different guests on for some time talking about how we're living in a post-constitutional republic where the government is no longer really, or the people who are posing in these roles and not playing their role constitutionally in any branch of the government. But you're saying that we have reason to believe that there's actually a coalition of military loyalists, basically patriots, who are wanting to reestablish the true constitutional Republic of America, and that are standing ready, or making, not just standing, but taking action steps to prepare for the ousting of this ruling cabal that we've been under the thumb of for over 100 years. Am I getting that part right?
I believe that's correct. What I understand simply is that group of military people organized themselves informally in a group called America First, and I believe are still cooperating together to withstand the attempted coups before the election, during the election, and since the election. And you may recall, perhaps it's only coincidence, but it's been pointed out by others that in the inauguration speech by President Trump, when he was sworn in, he used that phrase, America first, I think on 3 occasions.
Mm-hmm.
That I think is, well, you can look and find information that is available. It's a matter of your own perspective, your own worldview, and what your thinking will permit you to think and believe, and will lead you to believe. There are many people who have bought too much of the propaganda as being the honest truth. It's understandable why they would do that. But when it comes time to look squarely in the face at things such as the Great Depression, you just can't put that aside and say, oh, well, this was just an aberration. They were really mean there. They starved 6 million people to death or more. No, that's not what it is. And then you start checking out the other things, and you find out that all of these other things were lies just about as big as that one. And so with that kind of perspective, yes, you have to have a different worldview to start evaluating the kinds of information that we're able to pick up. If you only read the mainstream press, a lot of things that you find and other sources, well, your mind will just tell you, well, that's not consistent with all of this other stuff. How could that be? It's just off the wall. Well, once you realize what the proven facts amount to, then, boy, I tell you, you can look at the mainstream press, media, and come to a conclusion pretty quickly that they're making the stuff up. And it just isn't reality. We have to deal with reality, and I'm hopeful in thinking that, my goodness, the people who have organized to really put themselves on the line for all of this, far more than persons such as myself, they're doing it, and they're making the plans and trying to get the world into a better place that is not simply going to be drawn so-called inevitably, there's nothing anybody can do about it, into another world war to get these central bankers out of the attention span of the people who are trying to survive the fighting and conflict, when it's just another war brought on by the Rothschilds or the people around them who want to be bigger than the Rothschilds. It's a world that is challenging now, but my goodness, for so many years it looked as if we might not get the chance at all, and it might have been that we got the chance right at the last minute.
And as part of this opportunity,
it's not over yet, but we got a chance.
What you're saying is we may be seeing unfold before we may be experiencing this year, and since the election of Trump, for example, this coalition of those who are now again pledging their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to restore us to a constitutional republic. And you're saying one of the steps that we can look to is the emergency order that was signed on December 21st, and the timing of that is significant. If you could explain that, but to basically freeze and seize the assets, because I wanted to get, if you could first talk about the timing, why that's important, and then secondly, if we can talk about the assets themselves, because we've had many guests on our program talking about the bankruptcy of our nation and how all the gold has been caved out or just hollowed out of Fort Knox is empty, and we've got unpayable liabilities, and on and on and on. That basically makes it seem just bleak, the bleakest future you could think about. What are our children and our grandchildren going to inherit here? What dark times lay ahead? But I think if you could hit those 2 points for us of why is the timing of that executive order about freezing and seizing assets important, and what does it signify about the true bankruptcy or lack thereof of our nation?
Well, it was signed on the afternoon of December 20th. That's a very significant date. I figured that if anything of that nature was going to be done, the president could not do it. It's not that he just was thinking of other things up until that time. He could not do that and show his hand until the final vote on the tax cut was concerned. That tax cut, as a political matter beyond his control, was something that had to be acted upon in order to try to get the nation back to economic growth that could start building strength instead of it was sapping the strength of the country out on a daily basis. We were at the point of going under in terms of unpayable debt and so forth. And it had been purposely so, at least since 2006. It seemed to me that policies of the government clearly were intended to put the economy down to keep economic growth from happening.
There was a saying about the Obama administration, whose side are you on?
Well, no question about it. I had no question in my mind about whose side they were on, and it wasn't the people, I'll guarantee you that, or the economy. But nevertheless, so December 20th, when that happened and saw it the next day, December 21st, it became effective that morning at a minute after midnight. And I said, boy, that is a most important electric light. I think I took a week to digest the size of that thing, and I think wrote something at that point announcing that this looks like it is attacking the ruling elite globally. And the reason for it, again, why would that be done? It seems overwhelming evidence that there is absolutely horrendous amounts of the most evil kinds of mistreatment of human beings that you could imagine being carried out by high-level people in governments in this country and around the world. That they are human trafficking is the kindest thing that you can use to describe that activity. And I won't get into the ins and outs about it. I mean, you can certainly find out about it, but it has got to stop. And that is exactly why such an order was absolutely demanded, that there has got to be power to grab these people by the source of their power, which is their money, their assets, all that they've stolen. They've stolen trillions and trillions from the U.S. government, from the people as a whole, let alone all the trillions they've stolen from the private markets. And these have been built up certainly over the entire history of the country, but certainly since 1900. I mean, it is tremendous amounts of wealth that gives them that so much power around the world in so many ways that they can reach into every country. A number of different organizations, privately based supposedly, but the elitist organizations have that kind of power. And when that came to the fore, and you immediately started seeing important figures of major organizations all of a sudden announcing their retirement, announcing their resignation, announcing this, announcing that, because there is the risk to those organizations of which those people have been high executives. The organizations themselves are subject to having their assets seized as being complicit in the same corruption that the executives were. And so the executives have got to go. And then the executives, of course, have their own wealth, and they want to do what they can to try to safeguard themselves and their wealth and so forth. And so the chase is on. But my understanding is that some of those chases are coming to an end. I may be speculating about that, but by the reports, unless they're being badly exaggerated, that is most certainly the case. And there have been, one or two important instances reported that I'm sure your listeners will remember Solyndra, the solar and energy company that all of a sudden went bankrupt within a year or so after the Obama administration had granted them something like $2 billion for the development of new technology in solar energy, for new sources of energy, clean energy, and so forth. And they go bankrupt. Well, there's a report out, fairly detailed, that I've seen that indicated that a Delta Force had been sent in by the U.S. government with the agreement of the government of Thailand to raid a plantation, a mansion in Thailand. And apparently when the Delta Force got into the premises, the coffee was still in the mugs on the table and still warm, but they got some kind of a warning to get out. And so they seized that plantation and just happened to find $200 million in gold there as well. And it happens to be in the name of Solyndra Corporation. And the story is that perhaps there are a number of such properties strung across, Southeast Asia. So that's one story. And did I see the gold? No, I haven't seen it. But the sources, to me, are credible. And so it's that kind of thing. I would call that not a great big thing in which, therefore, our organized forces are standing down and resting a week or a month because they got that one place in Thailand. That's just another day's work, and maybe for a couple of hours of it. I mean, they have been busy. And so we'll have to see. Of all things, your listeners probably know that just within the last month or so, a major estate held by the Rothschilds, owned by the Rothschilds in Germany, I think it was Germany, maybe it was another of a smaller country in Western Europe, this very large landholding with a very, very large mansion of the Rothschilds had been held for 200 years or more, and all of a sudden it's been sold. So it could be that there's a liquidation of assets, perhaps even under seizure. I have no idea for certain.
And again, you talked about the importance of getting back to a sound currency, and you made the point in your interview with Sarah Westall that as long as our country continued with our negative balance of trade, which has been for decades, we've had this terrible negative balance of trade. And if that was, you mentioned back in the Nixon era when gold was going out the door, and he finally closed the gold window and split off the U.S. dollar from gold. But if you restore a sound currency and we continue this huge negative balance of trade because of all the various taxing policies and everything that motivate companies to offshore our manufacturing and so on, that had to stop first. And that was that also a logical connection there between why the tax cut and the repatriation of funds and that sort of thing was logically tied to this idea of the order of these steps necessary in order to restore our currency.
And the so-called renegotiation of the trade agreements, all of that is a part of the strategy. Very complex, obviously. Lots of pieces have to be in place. All of that also must be done within the context of keeping a rein on these just out-of-control wars in all parts of the world. The number of military bases that we have, 170 plus military bases in other countries around the world, And when responsible, high-level people are in the position of saying, what are those bases used for? They're used for trafficking of drugs and dope and small children. That is an absolute unacceptable situation, and one that has to be rectified as soon as possible. And yet it is a situation that has obviously existed with a lot of institutional support, we'll call it, from different parts of our economy and perhaps the military as well, and it has to be cleaned out. Lots of different players, and the game is complex. I don't know that it's a card game. People say it's four-dimensional chess, and I certainly can't disagree with that. But people that are up to the task, they say they're up to the task, and they've got it in hand. And boy, I'm certainly willing to give them the benefit of the doubt on that as far as what our prospects are. And I think that the people of the country should certainly sit up straight and listen for all you're worth, and do what you think is the right thing to do in terms of preparing yourself and being ready. And I think it's a little early to start getting prepared for the good days, the golden opportunities that will be coming in the future. We've got to get through this time of tremendous transition, because the world has not been that kind of a place for way too long, and our previous generations particularly have had to deal with this. And frankly, our future generations after mine have had to deal with worse circumstances than my generation. The ones that came on after this terrible inflation of 71 and couldn't buy a house until it's worth, priced at several $1 million, for, a middle-class house. This is the kind of thing that made it very hard for young marrieds to get on the rung of marriage and family and the household and so forth. And that's exactly what the ruling elite has wanted. They've wanted to kill the birth rate. They've done it every way they can, both with poverty, with vaccinations, with spraying the skies, anything to negatively affect fertility and health and well-being of people. This is the kind of circumstance we're still living in. I may be speaking as if I'm optimistic, but the battle is not won yet. We have a president, though, who is saying, we can do this. And I think that he's confident, and I think he's right. And
there's so much more that sounds like it's going to be unfolding. It sounds like this has all the earmarks of being a year for the history books in many ways. It could be as up to and including revolution from within. It could be the end of the grip, centuries-old grip of the central banks globally. It could be the time of great trial and tribulation. And you mentioned in your Sarah Westall interview as well as people, and we've talked about this a lot on our channel, the kind of tribulation that people should be preparing for to make it through, so that when we emerge on the other side, that they're still, their health and their wellness and their families are still intact, and they have the ability to pick up the pieces and rebuild. So guidance for people to consider carefully that sooner is better than later, if they want to seriously consider how they're going to try to protect themselves financially and have the life stuff of food and water and make sure that you're going to be able to make it through without depending on uninterrupted electricity and so on.
Yes, I think that kind of thing is very much in the balance, because we're still seeing what I would regard as false flags, terrorist attacks, against U.S. Locations. And I think they might have been worse if they hadn't been prevented, some of them. And so we have to be alert for things of that nature as well, and not so willing to believe the same major media that have been misleading us so badly in previous attacks or emergencies or whatever you want to call it, that are reported to us in ways that make it appear that it's our own people that are doing these things, that it's all ordinary people or far right, far left, whatever it is. American people have a lot in common, a lot of common interests that will be served very well by an approach that allows all humanity to do well. And that shouldn't be far right or far left or right or left. It's a national kind of thing that we think that people ought to have good opportunities. And frankly, if it hadn't been for the elitist power in so many of the European countries and other countries in the world, I think that would be much more of a part of their natural inclinations for the people as well. So why not have a world that is more free and outside the power and control of these absolutely venomous kinds of operators that I have to quote Liz Crokin. Your listeners are very likely aware of her, a very capable woman who has been doing tremendous reporting relating to particularly pedophilia and child trafficking and so forth, the kind of activity that is definitely a target of that December 21st order by the president. And she makes the point very clearly, she has made it so sharply. The world is ruled by elite pedophiles. She says it very well, and she has lots of evidence to back that up. And if that is the case, and it certainly appears to be, then it has been a long time coming, but it's time for it to end. And I believe that there's a very good chance that that is what we are talking about in regard to these executive orders and the necessity of martial law court-martials to bring to justice those people who are trying to pull down nations with this kind of a threat and corruption and control over even the highest public officials. So there we are.
We have been talking with Wayne Jett. He's the managing principal of Classical Capital. He can be reached at classicalcapital.com. Wayne, this sounds like it's going to be an eventful year. We'd love to have you back on as you see new signals emerging that either confirm or further inform the direction that you see us heading, because that's our tagline is helping you be aware and prepared. We certainly appreciate your helping us to be aware of things that are certainly not obvious to the ordinary observer. But thank you so much for joining us again here on Reluctant Preppers.
Well, if I might just say, Dunnigan, before we end, since about the 1st of January, maybe the last of December, I've been writing about these executive orders, and there are about 3 short items on my website, classicalcapital.com, that you could find that basically address these 3 things. I've only been writing about once a month lately, fairly short, and sometimes I feel I'm repeating, which in many respects I am. But I try to give my my views about what is important is going on. I'm sure there's a lot more than that, but you might check there and see if you find something to help.
Excellent. Thank you, sir, for joining us, and we'd love to have you back soon.
I look forward to it, and I appreciate the invitation anytime, Dunnigan.